Hi, I'm Howard County Historical Society Director Ann Shaw. We would like to welcome you to the 14th annual Howard County Hall of Legends event. This year we have 6 amazing individuals who are either from Howard County or have moved here to Howard County and made significant contributions in their lifetimes. This year's inductees include Bob Oth, a historic reenactor, Zania Cord, a quilting expert, John Grant, a musician and radio station owner, Jane Noble-Luljak, a state representative, Angela Martino, a restaurant owner, and Frank Stein, a physicist. Please sit back as we listen to their stories.
My name is Zania Cord, and I've been working with quilts since the 1980s. Mostly I study quilts. It's the history of women. And women's history is so often ignored, just written off as not particularly important. Those are just blankets. And understanding what those quilts mean to the people who made them and the importance that they had and who those people were and where they lived and what dignifies and identifies the type of quilt that they made. All of that interests me. Beginning of World War II, my parents and I, very small nuclear family, were living in Oslo, Norway, and my parents had decided that they were going to emigrate because my mother's 2 brothers were already living here. And that's a sort of a long story too. She was raised here because her father came here to the state of Maine to manage a paper mill. And so until from the time she was 6 until she was 18, she lived in Maine. And her brothers, who were older, were also here. And when her parents went back to Norway at the end of her father's employment at this mill, the 2 boys decided to stay here. They were already, of course, advanced in their life's work. And so Mother went back to Norway with her parents, met my dad, they married, and they decided they were going to emigrate. And so at the beginning of World War II, they had all their exit papers and everything. And then Germany invaded Norway, which made leaving extremely difficult. And even more difficult because my mother's parents had come back over here on an extended visit to visit their 2 sons. And they had come with enough luggage for a couple of weeks and enough money to have a nice vacation. And when the occupation took place, they had nothing. They had the stuff in the 2 suitcases and what money they had brought with them, because once the country was locked down, they had no access to any of that. So anyway, my parents were going to come, and Mother and I came on the last ship that left Oslo Harbor, apparently with several $1 million worth of gold bullion in the hull, in the hold. And the ship was followed by a German U-boat across the Atlantic. But other than appearing now and then, it did not do anything more menacing. My father was in the military in Norway and had to finish out his military service, which was a matter of 6 or 8 weeks. And his leaving was hampered by the fact that he was by himself and there were no ships going out of Oslo Harbor. So he had to take a train all the way down through Europe, through Germany, into Italy. And there were arrangements made for him to get on a particular ship in Italy that still had access to the Atlantic. He just barely got there because during his train trip, the Gestapo came on board the train, looked at his papers, and took him off and put him in jail. Never told him anything, of course. And at the end of 3 days, for some reason, they let him go again, gave him his papers back, and he was able to get to Italy in time. In all of that time, my mother had no idea where he was or what was going on. And it wasn't until they the ship he was on got close to New York, that he was able to call ship to shore and talk to her. And then she knew that he was going to get there. Their immigration was much more dramatic than mine. I just wanted the babe in arms. A friend and I were teaching at Indiana University at Kokomo, and we were asked if we could put on a summer class. We're both folklore students or graduates, and we were asked if we could put on a summer class for teachers who were returning to work on their certifications. And quilts had just hit pretty big as a collector item, as a thing people were talking about. There wasn't any published material, or very little, because the academic world had not caught up. So the two of us thought, well, we could do something with quilts in the summer, which gave us a certain amount of latitude. This was a graduate level course, and we had very interesting and very interested teachers in this class, and so we could be pretty flexible in what we did. And that was good because, as I said, there was very little academic literature about quilts. So we spent the week reading like crazy and going to as many sources as we could, and then turning around on the one day that the class met and unloading all this on the students, and then repeating it all the next week. So it was very much by the seat of our pants. As a part of that, we decided we could do a quilt exhibit, and we were going to do it there at the university. That turned out not to be an effective way to do it, and so we ended up doing it at the Howard County Library. We found out that there were a lot of people who had quilts and that they weren't sure what to do with them. So what came out of that was a business of mine to sell other people's quilts for them, which stuck me right in the middle of the antiques field, and that was fine. But there was also the academic side of things, and so as a part of the classes that we did, over the years we did 3 large quilt shows here in town, exhibiting the quilts that people brought into us to be photographed and reviewed, and then we had these exhibits at the library. A lot of quilt activity was going on in the state at that time. There was a state search, where they were looking for particular quilts to do a documentation book about quilts in Indiana. And there were a lot of people who were wearing their quilts. We had people like Ralph Lauren who were cutting them up and making garments out of them, which that was a very bad idea. It worked for him, but it raised the ire of people who saw quilts as more important than just yardage for making things that ended up in a garage sale in a year or two. So I still have my business selling other people's quilts for them, and I'm very involved with the American Quilt Study Group, which has seminars every year around the country that I always attend, and I teach at those seminars, and so I do those things. So I also write, because you can't teach if you don't research and write. So I guess that's what I'm doing. I'm astonished that anybody thinks that the things that I have done as a matter of things that I enjoyed doing, that they were significant enough to make me be an inductee. So I'm very flattered, but I'm still astonished, and I'm not quite sure I understand why all this has happened, but I'm pleased.
My name is John Grant. I'm the licensing and owner of WTSX-FM, LLC, and I'm the founding member, and I'm also a broadcaster. it was hard to buy rap records in the 70s and 80s. They didn't make a lot of them. There wasn't a consistent label presence in hip hop at that time. It was independent guys who would go to a pressing plant, press up 500-600 copies, get them out to a certain amount of stores in the area, and that was it. Moving to Jersey, when I got acclimated and started walking around, moving outside of my block, meeting people. You know, I met my first friend in Jersey. His name was Reggie Rock, my partner. He lived about 2 blocks away from me, close, you know, quarter mile through a park. And we went on this journey of learning about hip hop. We didn't know much about it ourselves. You know, hip hop was born in 1973. So this is 78. And then my cousin's friends happened to be artists like Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. My grandmother lived on Boston Road by the Bronx Zoo. So when I would visit my grandmother, I could see Raheem in the next building in the complex rhyming throughout his window. He had a box in the window playing. So before I even moved to Jersey, I knew about New York, the New York side of hip hop. Moving into New Jersey and then going into this famous pizzeria one day with my friend Reg, we happened to see 3 gentlemen. They were young. They were from the Bronx, transplants like us. Most people from that area, Fort Lee, Inglewood, were from the city. Cat was banging on a table and they were rhyming. I never seen anything like it, never heard anything like it until I saw the Sugar Hill Gang in the pizzeria. They were working there. And Reggie and I auditioned for the Wes Craven film, Nightmare on Elm Street. They wanted a hip hop soundtrack to it. They was gonna try it. It was an experiment. And we got lucky. They picked us. They picked our version. We wrote it. We recorded it ourselves. We mastered it ourselves. I mean, we had some help. Guys got Grammys now, but back then they were just our friends. But we ended up putting a good presentation together and they chose it. And then I don't know if they actually put it in the American version of the movie, but I know it played in the European part, you know, when they shipped the movie and distributed in Europe. The contest people started a label and they said, let's just put this record out. And that's basically how we started making noise as far as in the industry. Like everything else, like a record, it dies. It lives and it dies. You can only remix it so many times, make so many different versions. So at that time, we thought we were geniuses. So we linked up with a guy named Hunter Hayes, and we started our own label called Hunsaw Records with him. And we ended up doing an EP called Mellow. We took our part of New Jersey, which was Inglewood. He was from Patterson. So the world got smaller. So we started working with people from that area of New Jersey, all the way down to Newark, even down to Philly. It was a journey, you know, because you had to do shows wherever your record was being played. We visited every radio station that our record was being played at least on the East Coast. When we started going Midwest and West, then we needed help. And then we met Winston Sanders. Winston Sanders was, he had an artist that everybody knew. His name was Biz Marquis. He was his manager. We felt that if he was giving us attention at the time, we better go with it. So we did. We signed with him. He became our manager. And at that time, we were all trying to figure out how could we top that first record of Freddy Krueger. What did we have to do that? Mind you, we're funding ourselves. So he helped us get to Polygram, Mercury Polygram, and on a demo that the single that we ended up doing with him and shopping and getting to Polygram Mercury. So John was on there. Oh, and Eddie Murphy's brother, he was on that label as a rapper. The name of the group was called the K9 Posse. That's Vernon Lynch. We did the demo that got us to Polygram. The demo came about by me finding a record in my father's Dusty's collection. It was The Fifth Dimension. I opened up the record, I started playing it. It felt good, it felt nice. The groove, I've never heard it before because see, in hip hop at that time, it was taboo to sound like somebody else. And I realized at that time, at that point in the game, that I better get a relationship with DJs. And then we started getting day rotation on our old stuff while we were going through the Polygram process. And like I said, the Fifth Dimension record worked out. Management had to call the Fifth Dimension. It was called Stone Soul Picnic. We ended up using that to create Swing Beat. And at that time, it's good into the late 80s, early 90s, there was a movement in music called the New Jack Swing movement that a good friend of mine, Teddy Riley, and a lot of other musicians to help build that genre. But at that time, that's what it was, and it was combining hip hop and R&B together for the first time. And he was influential in helping us get the sound together. I had did a record with my cousin prior to that. In between it, I wrote another record that went platinum. Between us getting that record out, Swing Beat out, I was working with my cousin called The Classical too. They did a record, a classic called Rap's New Generation. And they went from Rooftop Records, which was an independent label, to Arista Records. They got signed by Arista. We went forth with that project. We got picked up. We signed a rock and roll budget deal for a single. And some people said that we took advantage of the situation, but Polygram Mercury really didn't have a rap group. That rap, they experimented a little bit, but they approached it as a rock group. So they gave us a rock and roll budget with a full band and this, that, the other. So it was lucrative for the first time in my life. It was, I was able to change some things for a long time. And we rode that record as long as we could till like 1992, and then I just got out of the business. But I still wanted to do something in the business. And I ended up moving to Atlanta, and at that time, internet radio was coming about, and I took a liking to it. And so I created Table Setter Radio as an internet radio station in Georgia, in Marietta, Georgia. Now, how did I get here? Well, just like anything else, you win, you lose. I decided to move to Indiana with a friend of mine. She had family in Gary. She's from Gary. And I moved to Gary with her and her family. And I got a call from John Tice. He was very, very, very strong about me coming here for some reason. I said, I'll take it. At the time, I'm staying with him. You know, John offered me help with a house, and they welcomed me with open arms, McGonigal, Button Dodge, and I stayed there from, I think, 2010 to 13. And I took it upon myself to actually go to a conference in Indianapolis, and I met a guy named John Horton. We're going to get a tune-in channel, which is at the time, it was very hard to get a show on tune-in radio because they were just starting out. But he bought into tune-in. He says, I'm going to put your internet show on tune-in. And he did that. And that's how I started gaining an audience, gaining some consistent numbers. It was hard working during the day, coming home at night. And I didn't go live, I recorded, but he got me to the point in 2 years to go live full time, have an engineer. But we finally got licensed. I got a construction permit for WTSX in 2013, 2014. And we branched into 5 other radio stations. We're on a 24-hour digital station in Rockford, Illinois. We're partnered with an FM station in Miami. We licensed the station this year in Atlanta, Georgia, in Noonan, right outside Atlanta. And we have a school in Cleveland. We have a DJ school in Cleveland. Our peak listening listenership is about 2.1 million people per day. But it took that 12 years to accumulate that. But at 5 million is when you get monetized. So we got a little ways to go. I feel very, very honored because I looked at the past inductees, and these are great people. Talk about the man that helped develop the first car, teachers. My doctor is a member of the Hall of Legends. I would like to thank the Howard County Historical Society for recognizing myself, but more importantly, recognizing the efforts of WTSX FM. And I hope that we could build a prosperous future together between Kokomo, music, and love. Thank you.
I'm Angela Martino, and my husband and I ran a restaurant for 60 years. I came in America when I was 11 years old after the Second World War, lived in New York for 3 years, then moved to Rhode Island, and then after we got married, moved to Kokomo in 1957. My childhood was a little rough.
because we had to live in caves after the Nazis took over our homes, and we had to live off of the land. We didn't have much of anything from town. We couldn't go to town. They took everything we had. They took our chickens, our hog. Therefore, we just survived on whatever we could find in the fields. The story is my father was already in America, and he brought each of his children, starting from the oldest, to America, and they worked to make it more money and bring the second, the third, and just went down to, at the end, it was after the war, he wanted us to come to America, my mother, my brother, my sister, and I, and we came to America in 1947, May of 1947. From New York, the conditions of the apartment wasn't very well. My mother's brother lived in Rhode Island, and he came to New York and saw the conditions, and that's when he asked my father to go to Rhode Island, find a home for us to move to Rhode Island. My father worked in construction in New York. My mother was a homemaker. He built bridges, the bridges in New York. Really, the immigrants from years back, that's who built New York. Well, my husband, he was going with another girl in New York, but he visited our family. We were neighbors in Italy. He was a very good friend with my brother. So he came to visit my brother and the family. And then after I grew up, I guess I must have changed from a little girl to a teenager, older teenager, and that's when we got together. But we corresponded while he was in the Army also. When we got engaged, I told him, now, when we get married, I do not want to move to Kokomo. I want to stay in Rhode Island because my family is all in New York and Rhode Island. He says, oh, you don't have to worry, we're not going to move. Well, a year later, he wanted to move to Kokomo. And of course, I wasn't too happy about that, not knowing anybody but just his family. But then things worked out. So we moved here in 1957. I was pregnant with our first son. And then after a year and a half, we built our first home, paycheck by paycheck. And then in 1959, we moved into the home we built. He worked at the steel mill for 17 years. And then we started the donut shop. And it was called the Mini Ann Donut Shop. We started with short orders and kept adding. Then we added spaghetti, then we added pizzas. We outgrew that after 2 years. And then we bought the North Star on North and Main Street. We named it Martino's Inn. And we tore that down for parking, and that's why the building is like an L. And then we outgrew that after about 8 years, and that's when we built Martino's Italian Villa on North Washington Street. And we were in that building for 50 years. So a total of 60 years in business. When I was young, I watched the people in New York, the relatives, how they cooked. And my husband knew how to cook a little more from the service. And I think he even took some classes, I'm not sure about that. And we start cooking by taste, by trying different recipes on our own. And we just kept on going with different entrees. Pizzas, we made our own sauce, our own pizza dough. Same with spaghetti sauce, we made all that. We made everything. Yes, we had a garden behind the restaurant. My husband would plant tomatoes, peppers, a lot of basil. We love basil in the sauce. Parsley, we garnished with parsley on top of the spaghetti, and also with basil during the summer. And we used the tomatoes, fresh tomatoes for salads. At the restaurant, green peppers, we used them on pizzas or stuffed green peppers or whatever we wanted to fix with. But everything was fresh in the summertime. I was called twice to appear on the Guy Fieri show, but we declined because it was hard for us to leave, and it was hard to really run around like that, the way they do it, and that's the reason we declined, but they called twice. Our children were brought up in a restaurant as a very young age, 7, 8 years old. Whatever they could do, they did. You know, even sweep or clean a counter, or my daughter, she was a little older. She buttered the garlic bread, and then my boys, when they were older, they ran the pizza room, all 3 of them. When they went to high school, they worked at nighttime, alternate nights. When they went to college, they'd come home on weekends and work in the pizza room. So it was really a family restaurant, but we worked all together. I started before my husband died. I asked him, I'd like to sponsor a child out of the country. And it started with the Christian Association. We sponsored a child, it's been 22 or 23 years, Haiti or wherever the need is the most, so they can go to school. Our sponsorship buys the children books, everything they need for school. And if it wasn't for a sponsorship, they could not afford to go. I still do that. I am very honored, and I'm thankful, very humbled, but I credit a lot of it to my family, my clientele, because without teamwork, it's hard to accomplish a lot of things. And thank God we've tried to accomplish a goal. And it takes dedication and perseverance to stay in business that long and work hard.
My name is Bob Auth. I've lived in Howard County all my life, born right here at St. Joe Hospital, and I'm just 70 years of age, and about 23 years ago started Kokomo, Foster Living History Encampment, and it's just been quite a trip to be on, and I've enjoyed every bit of it. Kokomo originally started, Brian Wilson got a hold of me and wanted to do a video for the state of Indiana for the 4th graders. And I just spoke to him about coming out and being part of this reenactment. He said, okay, I'll come out. And we met, and really the video that we did for the state of Indiana, they sent a whole crew out. And I had about 25, 30 reenactors that showed up for it, and they did nighttime filming, they did skirmishes, they really put on a nice video, and that's really kind of how it got started. And then everybody said, hey, you need to do a reenactment here. So that's really the kickoff for Kokomo. My wife and I have 105 acres, and Kokomo took place, including the parking lot and the woods and the whole area. It took up about 15 to 20 acres. Started Kokomo the year of 9/11. We had quite a bit invested in it, and didn't know whether to pull the plug or to go forward. Well, President Bush came on TV and said, go about your business. So that gave me the green light, because it was only a week from when 9/11 happened. So we went forward with it, and then it went on for about, if you want to take out the COVID situation, we went for 20 years, and if you want to throw in the the movie that was made and the time, it went over a span of about 24 years. The first year we had about 160 reenactors and several food group folks that came in and sold food, and that was the start. And we grew to well over 1,000 participants. Some even came all the way in from Arizona every year. They loved it out there. Even had a lady in from England. I can't quite remember the story and how she ended up here, but went to 2,000, and I think maybe the highest number might have been 2,400. But I kind of run some calculations. I think about 35,000 kids over the span of time had come through just for the Friday program, just for the kids and the kids only. And the reenactors, they came and supported the school day, which was my favorite time. And they came and just loved to help out in any way they could. It was a very special day of the full 3-day weekend. Brian Wilson, who organized all the military, of course he wanted things just right, and Pat, who organized all the demonstrations, she brought in some pretty nice demonstrations. One particular, he built furniture for the White House that was period correct. He brought a whole truck and set up a tent, and it had a kitchen, a living quarters in it, and then a bedroom, and he had all this fine handmade furniture. There was no power equipment used on it. I mean, it was special. It meant so much. We aggravated a few people. We ended up mainly focusing on the French and Indian War, because these reenactors, they care so much about who and what they portray. They didn't like a mixed bag, let's say, of Rev War versus French and Indian, which was in the 1740 to just pre-Revolutionary War, and the clothing is just enough different. They wanted the clothing perfect. So we had a set of standards, and everybody that wanted to come and play at Kokomo had to send photos of their camp, their clothing, and it was really, and I have to credit Brian Wilson and Pat Scott with that. I did not have the expertise, but they sure did. I set the music festival with my friend Dwayne Davis. We created that, and it's been going on now for about 14 years. And so the grounds was already ready for it. I just needed to move the stage down into the shade. And again, with bluegrass music, it's not what everybody likes, but it is a part of our history in this country. And basically it goes all the way back to Irish music. And so we started having that festival, and it went pretty well. Sometimes it run me a little ragged trying to pull both of them off. And so that's the way the Winding Creek got started. We went down to a Jerusalem Ridge, and Dwayne knows I get a little aggressive when I decide to do something, and I said, hey, we need to put on a music festival. He said, okay. I said, we're gonna hire a band today. He said, well, you don't even know when it's gonna be. I said, no, we're gonna set the date here. So we set it for the third weekend, and he was pretty nervous, and I went up and started talking to this band, and we had them hired before we left that day, and that was gonna be our base band. And we have about anywhere from 12 to 14 bands that play at Winding Creek, and the camping's free. The price to get into admission, if you want to camp, there's just no charge. It's primitive, but it has become a really nice festival. And how long I'm going to be part of doing this, I'm not sure. I kind of look at things every 5 years, and so that's how Winding Creek got started. Without all the people that helped pull this off, it just couldn't have been done. And I thank all the reenactors. I thank the Milburn family for taking care of the front gate. All the food vendors, from the Boy Scouts to Historical Society here, the churches that participated, they always made great food. And again, all the reenactors brought it together, and the public. The public supported it. I think our biggest year there was reenactors and public. We just came just under 9,000 people there, including the school day. And can't say enough about Pat Scott, who co-hosted with me so many years, and Brian Wilson. And then all the other military people who led, and we did these battles. There'd be 300, I think about 350 people at the battlefield at one time, and cannons going off, and you can go to YouTube and find some pretty cool videos on Kokomo. So just not enough can be said about all these people that helped. Being inducted into the Hall of Legends is an honor that I appreciate it so much. Sure did not expect that, but for Kokomo, it's the icing on the cake. So, and I love cake.
I'm Dave Lujack, and I'm the son of Jane Noble Lujack and my father, Laddie Lujack. Her parents were Lee J., known as Deke Noble, and Ethel Noble. She grew up in Greentown and then lived a lot of her life from maybe 7 or 8 on into college in Kokomo. Her father was a newspaper editor and publisher. And so they lived in Greentown when he was publishing that newspaper, and then he moved to Kokomo to become editor of the Tribune and eventually became the publisher. So that's why they were in Kokomo for so long. She was the editor, for instance, one of the editors of the yearbook. She was also a prom queen in her senior year. I'm not sure if there are any particular stories. She was very fond of her family and frequently talked about them. I think her father had the most impact on her, and he himself ran at least once, maybe more, for city council, unsuccessfully. And I think his own political leanings maybe were part of what encouraged my mother to go into politics and eventually be elected to the state legislature. She was majoring in political science, and again, whether that was her own inclination or influenced by her her father, I'm not sure. So she went straight to DePauw, and then after a couple of years joined the WACS and was in for, I think, 2 years until the conclusion of the war, and then went back to DePauw and finished up her studies there. So she was in the division that was related to cryptography, and she herself was a part of a large group of women who did administrative type work. She wasn't actually breaking codes and such, but she did a lot. There's all sorts of records and so forth to keep and things to keep straight, and there were a lot of women doing that, and she was part of that crew. I can't remember if it was senior year or maybe a 5th year that she ran for the state legislature and was elected. And she ended up, when she was at DePauw, she met my father, and he was 1 year behind her in school. So she ended up doing a 5th year there while he was finishing. And I believe by that point she had been elected. And I know she said that last year since there were a lot of veterans that had come back to college, they had to come up with a different way to house them than the normal situation. And so they had gotten a lot of Quonset huts from the Army, and they divided them in half and put 2 families in these Quonset huts. And so they lived their last year when they were married in Quonset hut. In terms of how they met, I think somebody kind of arranged it, sort of not necessarily a blind date, but something like that. And yes, I never really thought of that as a power couple, but I guess they were at DePauw anyway. She actually didn't really talk much about her political career, which is kind of interesting. A lot of what I know about it has come from reading, and including the fact that she was profiled in Life magazine in January of, I believe, 1950. And the story was titled The Co-Ed Legislator. And so it was about the odd occurrence of somebody still in college and a woman being elected to a state legislature somewhere in the country. But I did come across a couple of pieces of hate mail that she received. So, we have a lot of instant hate going around these days because of the internet. There, you had to have somebody cut out a picture of you in a newspaper and draw little devil horns on top of your head and send it to you. And somewhere in our papers, we still have that. My personal feeling is that in a way, it maybe didn't completely suit her personality, because I think she did mention once or twice that she didn't really like the actual political part of it, having to make deals and compromises. And so in some ways, I think she was happy to have done it and very proud of what she did, but was not a lifelong politician. And since she had gotten married, and once my father graduated, he was offered a job down in Texas. So they did what almost everybody did back then, is followed the husband to his job, and she moved down to Texas and started a very different life down there. I think right away when they arrived in Texas, she got a job working in a title company. So she did that kind of work. She was very good at organizing and related to what she did when she was in the wax. I was just about to mention that. Very good. She would really be honored to have this. As I said, she had very warm feelings about Indiana and her childhood and her family, and going on through high school years and college, and then serving in the legislature. And a phrase she often used, which I'm sure would be one she would use about this, is that she would be tickled pink to get an honor like this.
Hi, I am Joan Stein Jenkins. I'm Frank Stein's daughter. My dad was a very honorable and decent man. I mean, that's his core. Plus, he was funny, he was smart, he was sophisticated, he knew music and art, and he was a great dad, he was a great husband, and he was a great member of the community. Well, my dad was born in 1921 in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. His family went there because his grandfather went there. Amish is Low German and Yiddish is Low German, so they could communicate. And my grandfather was a peddler. He grew up there. His mom was a homemaker. His dad was a dentist. He had a family and a community that he loved dearly. And he went to school at Franklin Marshall, and then he got his master's at Cornell and his PhD at Columbia, all in physics. When World War II came, when he tried to enlist, they said no, and they pointed him to a different line because he was studying at Columbia. He was studying with the Nobel Prize winner, Isidore Rabi. I don't know if he had been the Nobel Prize winner at that point or if he was later on. And he was siphoned off into helping with the Manhattan Project. He met my mom there, who was working in the patent office, I think as a secretary. She got coffee 5 times a day, I think probably because she saw my dad was in that lab there. And they fell in love and got married. We moved to Kokomo from New Jersey, and is very far away from my mom's family. And It was a little bit hard at first, but she found a home that she loved here. And my folks loved music. My dad loved classical music, and he was very intent on making sure that Kokomo had classical music. He loved the arts. He was thrilled to be part of the Arts Center, the Fine Arts Center. He was very connected with the Jewish community through the temple. Very proud of that. He helped to standardize things because, you know, it used to be if you bought one type of appliance or something, a computer, you needed a certain type of plug. He wanted to standardize everything. And that's what he helped with Bureau Standards. I don't know if that was ever accomplished. And JEDIC Council, Frank's rules are part of JEDIC Council. After the war, after the Manhattan Project, my dad was very interested in applied physics. He was one of the early people who worked on semiconductors at Westinghouse and General Instrument. And when we moved to Kokomo, I think that was part of what he did. He worked with semiconductors. What was pretty amazing is to have a research center for General Motors in Kokomo, Indiana. It brought an incredible collection of interesting people. My dad was, he was a Renaissance man. He was interested in everything, basically. But he was very interested in genealogy. He was interested in history. He was interested. I think he helped with the Elwood Haynes Museum to get that because he really wanted those aspects of history that were local to be well known. He was very influential in community concerts. And I remember having, going to community concerts with just incredibly wonderful violinists and all sorts of people. And he loved that. He loved that there was the art center, the Fine Arts Association by the park. He loved feeding the ducks, even sometimes when you weren't supposed to anymore. He loved polar bears. He collected Inuit soapstone carvings and porcelains, and he went with the Smithsonian to Manitoba to see them in person, in bear, I guess not in person. And he really, he's just interested in everything. He would be tickled. He would be thrilled. He would wish that my mom were there with him. And the fact that they're both there together is just how they do things. It's how they roll, you know. It makes it so special. And my mom would have just been so elated. Anytime anybody could see what a great guy my dad was, my mom was very happy. Let me live in a house by the side of the road where the race of men go by, the men who are good, the men who are bad, as good and as bad as I. I would not sit in the scorner's seat, nor hurl the cynic's ban. Let me live in a house by the side of the road and be a friend to man. And that is how he would like to be remembered.